Excited. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm Dasan Ahanu, and one of the coaches with, it's so funny is because it's LIT, I just want to say lit all the time. I don't even know if I remember what the acronym stands for anymore. Because it just feels good to be like the lit cohort. Like it just feels good to just be like, that's what it is. Uh, but I'm glad to be here. And today we're going to talk about um, contracts and statements of work. And so I want this, um, I'm going to kind of guide us through this, but I want this to be a real conversation because I know that we've all had experiences with these things. And so I'm hoping that the things that I'm going to kind of cover are going to kind of either reflect things that we've learned, seen, thought about, are going to reflect, things that we've learned the hard way, or might be different ways of thinking about it as we move forward and kind of, go through these things as we continue to navigate our career. So feel free to offer thoughts and comments and jump in as we move through this. And we can just kind of, go from there. So I'm going to share my screen. Oh, this is interesting. Okay. Okay, hold on. All right. Oh, there it is. All right. I was about to say. All right. All right. So we're going to talk contracts and statements of work. And both are extremely important. It took me a minute to really kind of just understand the difference and then how they go together. One of the reasons why, and I want to go ahead and admit, is that you won't, my experience is that I haven't always used both. And depending on who you're working with, some use these things interchangeably. Some folks will do one or the other and use them as both. There's a lot of practices out here, especially depending on the size and the capacity of the organization. But it is important to understand both because they can be very useful, and they can be very useful for us. One of the things about it is that what I feel like happens too often, what I find myself in a lot of conversations with, and please let me know if you find yourself having the same conversations, is not wanting to be the bad guy. And especially as artists of color, we just kind of overthink our conversations about our work and what we need and what it requires and what we want. And it's a shame because there are folks, to be completely honest, there are folks who do not invest the amount of time and thought and care and passion into our work, who are asking for a lot more than we think to ask for. Of course, they always say it's not what you deserve, is what you negotiate. But one of the things about it is that, part of it is getting over that idea of being the bad guy. So there's some pre-work that you were sent, and in that there were three things that it asked you to kind of take a look at. The first was an artist statement, and I kind of like to think of this as a artistic statement because, and the reason why is that depending on the work that you're doing and who you're doing it for, you may get asked to make an artist statement, which is more specific to the work. This is more so about your work overall. But it asks you to consider some questions. What art do you make? Why do you make it? What makes you excited about it? And then also to talk about the way that you make that art. But that is an important piece to our conversation today. It doesn't always feel like it. Sometimes we go into having these conversations about doing work without taking all of that with us. But I feel that that's an important part of it. The other part of it was what was called an artist declaration. And it asks you to answer a series of questions that were about you specifically as an artist. What are you a product of? Who are you? Where are you a product of? What are you a product of? What do you stand for and believe in as an artist? And who are you as an artist? And so that was the second part. The third part was an interesting piece about pricing. And I don't know about y'all, but I have to this day have ongoing conversations with other artists about our pricing, where we're pricing ourselves, how much we're charging, what are we being offered. I also have conversations with younger and emerging artists about the same thing. I get phone calls all the time. I got asked to do this. What do you know, so it's an ongoing conversation. But I learned along the way that we have to think comprehensively about the way we're charging and what we're seeing as the price. And so I hope that activity kind of helped to reinforce that when you're thinking about it, there's a lot of things that go into your worth for that time period and for that work. And so when we can get to a sense of knowing what we need or what we want, then we can operate from a better position in terms of how we want to price ourselves. But the intent of that was to build this kind of artist profile, And I'm not saying that these three things like define you, but they do help in defining the way that you negotiate and the way that you have business conversations, because they're very key in being able to hone the conversation in. So what I wanted to start by doing is just seeing if there were thoughts about the pre-work, about any of that, questions, things that stood out, or just take a moment to kind of have a conversation about the ways that you have, the experiences that you've had in working with clients and folks who are commissioning you, and how you've defined your work, defined yourself, and thought about what you were looking to charge. Anybody?
I guess I'll start. I will say I apologize, Dasan. I didn't get any of the pre-work, so I don't know where it was posted, the pre-work, but I would love to have it. A lot of this, information you're talking about, I do already have, and I've done. But I would love to incorporate that and be more specific with the questions that you're posing.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as, getting to that piece of your worth, I mean, I actually had something happen more recently with a nationally known organization that wanted to contract me to produce a documentary style film that was going to be in conjunction with the local PBS. And so when I drew out my statement of work, that they asked for like a turnaround of like a day. And, as a film producer, documentarian, storyteller, a turnaround of a day is a lot, especially when they're giving you very little information. You don't know anything. So I literally knew very little bit about their project. And I asked for a large number, and I really went based on, what felt large to me, because sorry if this is offensive to anyone, but I feel like a white man with half my gifts would ask for 10 times more and feel very confident in that and feel like he was worthy of that. And so I asked for, it was like 36,000 for a contract of 5 months, based on only giving a maximum of 10 hours a week to this project. It's very specific. They never contacted me back. And it was so painful because I had met with these people in person. They were very excited. And honestly, they were Black folks. And Dasan, it felt like I expect that from people who often don't look like me, but it felt even more unjust and unequitable in relationship with individuals who look just like me.
Mhm.
And so I think, but also realizing that worth part, that not to question what I bring to the table and not to question what I'm asking for.
Mhm.
Maybe next time I'll ask for more.
Right. And I think and thank you for sharing that. And that's one of the things why I think it's good to think about these in tandem. Because if you don't think about them in tandem, sometimes any one of these can take you in a direction that you don't really need to go, and it can make you really hard on yourself. You may have things that you can have, if you focus on the work and you want the work out, then that can lead you to agree and take some concessions and establish and connect with partners and collaborators that you probably shouldn't be wanting to work with. If you're so focused on yourself as an artist, then there may be things that your heart and spirit may be being pulled to that really aren't really aligned with your work and really are not aligned with your worth. But our hearts are pulling. And that one's hard because I had a situation where someone cussed me out because I made a decision and made an agreement based on that. And it just so happened I had someone in my network who was on the other side that I didn't know and was at the decision-making table. And when my name came up and what they had got me to agree to based on my feelings about the work they were doing, they were like, don't you ever, I got read the riot act. And it was tough because I thought I was doing them a favor because of the nature of the work. How that showed up in the room did not reflect the reason why I agreed and gave them the rate that I gave them. And that's the thing that was like eye-opening, like, oh, there's a fine line, but in that between what your intentions are and what another person's expectations are. So when you kind of keep these all in mind, then in those situations like that, what they essentially showed you is that they aren't in alignment, because what should have happened, I mean, it's a yes or no. You like and you're right. In any other situation, it would have been yes or no. But a no response, a no response is a different type of messaging. And that's the kind of thing that is really tough, because they had no qualms about the time that they asked you to invest to even get them the information. And then you weren't worth the same consideration of time to craft a response. Just shoot me an email. You know what I'm saying? You ain't got to see me in the eye. You ain't got to look me in the eye. You ain't have to do that. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't have to look me in the eye. We ain't got to get on the conference call, get on Zoom. You don't have to phone. You don't have to nice little email back saying, we appreciate you, but we're going to have to do something different. Fine. Cool. At least that's understandable. Any other thoughts, comments? All right. And
I,
Demi and Marcus, y'all can jump in too. Yeah,
I'll add to that, Dasan. I do find that often there's this expectation that as artists, people want our work for free and they don't want to pay for it, as if like we don't have to live, or as if art's not worth it. And and then it only becomes valid when you are a household name, and I watch it. I've seen that all the time with my husband, who's in the industry, and no one knows you. And then you're in a big movie and everyone's like, oh yeah, we really value his work. But you weren't checking on him last year.
No.
In between jobs.
Right. Folks get a little bit taken aback. I always say that as a society, we love art, but we really don't love artists. And part of that is that we get so enamored with the outcome that we don't think about neither who has to provide that outcome or the work or time or effort it takes. And as artists, we've dealt with that the entirety of our careers. You know, we've had folks wondering why are we doing a thing? And it's like, because it don't happen overnight. It takes time, it takes effort. And one of the things that was was really eye-opening for me was to be pushed into a situation of thinking about that comprehensively, because I didn't. I would invest all the time and energy and would rate the finished product, and I was feeding that notion of caring about the outcome and not about me as the artist. But when you talk to folks who are contract or work independently in other industries, you know, starting with attorneys and like that rate includes their entire life. So you don't pay the rate. You can't get the outcome without considering the person. And that's not something that as artists that we're encouraged to do. We're you know, it's almost like we're chastised for wanting to be artists, and then but everybody wants some art. And that space between is not considered.
Yes, that's actually, I'm sorry
No,
for
go ahead.
jumping like that. Actually, that is what I was thinking. We talking and what Lauren say, and it's something that always that hit me a lot when people say, "Oh, how long can you do that?" And my answer is 50 years. Oh, but that yes, because I did this from what I learned this month of last year. I did this because I have 50 years working in my craft. So that is why I charge what I charge.
Mm-hmm.
They say, okay. So I know, because I hear, you know, people talking, no, art from Emilio is expensive. And I remember one day listening to the in a show, in an art exhibit. And I say, oh, thank you for recognizing that, because yes, my art is expensive, because I work I'm sorry for the expression, but I say today, I work my ass off to be where I am now. And that is what I charge.
Mm-hmm. And we're in a unique place. And this also factors into the way we negotiate. Like I always tell folks, you know, there's also this place that we have to navigate where the folks who want something for free are prevalent, and we run into them often. But then there are a batch of folks who don't mind paying premium for what we do, who aren't going to make themselves available until they see us position ourselves or move in particular ways. Because at a certain point, the way that they view, and it's a shame for artists to be in this position, but you can you can really, really be doing your most to make yourself accessible, to maintain the quality of your art and your craft, but make sure that you can work, you know, you're not priced too far out of working with folks. And then there are a group of folks who are watching you do that, like, I'm not helping you or working with you or making resources available, because you shouldn't be doing that. And you won't know until you stop. And then suddenly you're like, I don't know what I'm gonna do, but I can't do this anymore. And suddenly a project comes, a resource comes, a connection comes, and they're just like, I was just waiting for you to stop doing that. And but that's also, but part of it is the nature of business. There are folks who see business a certain way, and things have to be at a certain place for them to invest time and energy. So part of us, you know, so it's like you have to kind of, you know, make your way through. But you're right, like that 50 years of time and effort in the craft is exactly the way you put it, because that's worth something. You
I
know,
think it's real. Oh,
go ahead, Mark.
I was gonna say real quick, just to your point, like I've actually seen that in action, right? Like I've seen somebody refuse to purchase a piece from an artist because they were like, they have undervalued themselves. You know, like I'll buy that painting when it's like $1,500, not $300, right? Because like they don't want to be a part of that devaluing of that piece or that artist themselves. And so it's like, nope, I'm gonna wait, you know. And I know for me, like walking around sometimes the different art festivals, I'll see, especially artists of color, Black and brown artists, like, you know, like I know you want to make, like it feels good to make a sale, you know, and then somebody like appreciates your work. But then like I know sometimes I'll come by and I'm like, yeah, like your art being $100, but like you have this like 18 by 24 piece and it's like $100 or $200. And I'm just looking at it like that at least is $400 or $500, you know, at minimum. And just because of the time that you've put in, and then maybe the years prior that you've put in all of that work, you know. And so like I can't remember who told me, but years ago somebody told me like, once you get to a certain point, you're paying for the previous years when I didn't charge the people what I should have charged them, right? When I was asking people to pay me $200 for an 18 by 24, when I should have been asking them to, you know, when I should have been asking for 1,500. So you're paying for all of that once I've hit, you know, once I've hit a certain space. So I think that's something to keep in mind too.
And one of the things, now this is my personal position, and I've gone to bat with other artists over this, is that there's a large conversation about transparency around numbers. And I'm process oriented. So, you know, the reason why I've combat that is that I think it's good that folks are out and about and saying, hell no, we need to start telling each other numbers so that we don't continue to get taken advantage of. So if I made, you know, however much on a project and I'm like, yes, that's totally fine. But also some people, you know, depending on the project and the nature of the relationship and the dynamics, don't want to disclose but so much information. But what gets missing is that the number gets talked about, but the process doesn't. And the thing is that how you arrived at that, there's two questions that I always wonder. How you arrived at that number is what I'm, and then when you did the project, did you feel that the number you settled on would properly match the amount of work that you ended up having to do in your experience on the project? Because that helps me negotiate. Because if I saw you get a number, I'm like, yo, that number's crazy. And then you're like, you tell me how you came to that number, and then you tell me, but look, I did that project, man, and I needed $25,000 more. And I'm like, but I thought that number was crazy. Then that tells me a lot more than the number. So I feel like that, you know, one of the things that's important about that is the process. And I think that even speaks to what Marcus was saying, is that more conversations about the process of getting from 200 to 600 can help someone make the leap to go ahead and charge 600, you know, because the uncertainty can make you numb and can like hold you in a place of not taking that leap. Until you talk to someone who was like, nah, just price it at 600, and eventually somebody bought it. And it's like, one painting sells for what I would have had to try to sell, because you also have to paint each one if you sell them at 2. You know what I'm saying? 3 paintings take a lot of time for you to make 600 when you could have sold one for 600. Like, yeah. So this is a great conversation, and it's so necessary because we're all having these experiences, and there's different expectations. They're not always the same. One of the things also that I found really interesting is a conversation about the way we communicate. And I think this is especially important also for artists of color, just because of societal dynamics and the rooms that we find ourselves in to do this work, especially with the way that public art is so big. So now we find ourselves sitting in rooms with city and public officials. Telling particular stories is really important right now. So there's a lot of folks who might not have been interested in those stories who are inviting artists of color into rooms with folks who don't necessarily look like them to have conversations. And the communication dynamic can be really interesting. And one of the things about it, you know, there's these 5 considerations for communicating about the work. But that first one, which is confidence, was one that I think is very important. Reason being is that there are markers of being considerate that may come across as unsure. And that's, and that's tough when you're negotiating cultural differences, when you're, so for instance, there's the example. So like so here's an example email. And it says, thank you so much for your message. I'm glad you're interested in my services. From your email, it looks like that you're after, whatever particular service. I feel like that that what you're looking for might best be suited for this particular offering. I normally charge between this and that for that kind of work. Though we can talk more about this once I know more about your project. Love to talk more. Hope this sounds good for you. Thank you. And which seems like a reasonable and considerate response, leaves room open to have a conversation, invites a little bit more talk. But it's the idea that that's a little too open. And there's a nuance in that where the counter to that is, thank you for your message. Based on your proposal and, in these variables, my rate will be between this and that. Assuming the preliminary discussions aren't too extensive, I'd estimate that we can probably get this done in this amount of time. Please let me know how you'd like to proceed. So there's a little nuance in that, but the second one is a lot more direct and assertive, and involves more of a call to action. But the point is that the second one's going to sound different than the first one. But what I do know is that the first one often sounds more welcoming, more considerate, more warm, but may not necessarily be the one that moves the needle. Also may consider a particular message that we not want to convey. So that thing of confidence is not just about the belief in ourselves. We believe in ourselves and believe in our art. It can be about the savvy in the way that we communicate, and trusting that there's things that we don't need to have to do in the way that we communicate and engage with folks who are looking to work with us. Does that make sense? Is anybody, but anything that's coming to mind in terms of anybody's experiences having those conversations, saying, responding to an inquiry about work or about service or about a project, and feeling like that kind of like the way you communicate it might have either sometimes it can kind of delay or extend the way, it doesn't kind of move things the way that you would like.
Yeah, I think I got a scenario that kind of crosses the communication, and I was needing some feedback about how y'all felt about it. And again, I want to just apologize for being late, but I do theater, right? So I create, like, every year at least do like a show, whether I'm writing, directing it, or whatever. And I like black box theater. I like affordable theater. I like theater that I could promote to my friends who usually don't go to theater, but they're okay with, spending a little $15 to come support me, maybe 20, 25, around that range, but they're not that interested, but they're really interested in supporting me and what I'm doing, but they could be interested because it's affordable. And so I had a show maybe like 2 years ago. And I think at that time I was only doing $15. I think it was like a Thursday. I was doing like a $15 show, and I think I do Sundays $15. And so, and that's just, I want to make theater affordable. That's just my desire for theater. I go to Broadway, I go to the big theater here, and I spend $40, $70, but that's not my desire. I had a critic who works for like a local newspaper. She came up to me after the show. She was like, "Oh, I enjoyed the show, but I think your tickets are just too low. Like, why would you give this away for $15? And it was, you know, I was a little offended because it's like I'm not giving it away for $15. That's I think affordable price that I have talked to with my immediate community around, you know, making it accessible, you know. And I don't know if I said, you know, I was trying to say it without trying to be militant or offensive to the critic, because, you know, critics, they get to write up and, you know, it's kind of in their hands. But I felt like I was really put in this position where her, you know, I was confident in why I set it at that price, but her version of my worth of the work was based on this idea that theater should be expensive, and where I think community black box theater should be very, very accessible, you know. And so, and I'm confident in that, but she kind of made me feel like I was supposed to feel a way about that. So I'm kind of putting that out there, like, like, how would y'all respond in that situation? And then knowing that they have power to write what they want to write, you know, and kind of that, you know, they're the players in the theater game here.
I definitely have thoughts. Anyone else have thoughts before I say anything?
I do, Tariq, because I mean, I hear both sides. I actually can hear and understand maybe where the critic is coming from. And I will say that in the theater world, like, people will pay for a ticket to a movie and the drinks and the popcorn, and they place greater value in that than the theater world. And being a theater trained actor, I respect the hard work and labor that goes into putting on any performance, whether it's in a black box or whether it's proscenium with a, you know, 800 plus audience. So I get that, where she's like, your work is of a certain kind of worth, and what you're delivering to your audience is transformational. I think you should charge more, and you'll still have a full house. I also feel like our friends who don't normally go to the theater, where do we invite them into the space of, like, you know, you can't even really get into a movie anymore for $15. I don't even know what it costs now, like $16.50, like, you know. So but I really appreciate what you're doing and saying that I want to make space for all people to come to the theater and be able to enjoy this experience while making it, you know, affordable for them to do so. But I do think that your friends would still pay $30 for a ticket. I do.
The ones who could afford it, and what, mind you, was a
Yeah.
1 day, right? You know, and I love that comment you said, fill it up either way. But I'm always thinking, like, well, who is the seats for, right? Is it for the ones
Yes.
that could afford the $50 tickets, right?
Mhm.
You know, there are people will come
Mhm.
for sure.
Mhm.
No.
That's true.
Yeah, I like to say that first of all, Tari, thank you for do that, because yes, I agree, and I like to, you know, to value my work and my art, but I also I understand the artists too. We need to give our art for free for those who have no access or have no money to get that. That is why I love public art, because public art is up there and everyone can enjoy for free once the public art is exhibit. And but we need also, we need as an artist to hear what the people say. For example, this art critic that was telling you is too low, and we need to find the median, right? For example, in Palm Beach, I was in a country club where very rich people live, and I was there, and because I was exhibiting, actually the art piece that is here in my background was there, and the new exhibit in the Palm Beach International Airport was almost in, and I am one of the 15 artists that they choose to be in that exhibit. So right now, one of my art pieces is there. So in those days, they were asking about my art piece in the country club, and they hear the news about me being one of the 15 selected for the airport exhibit. And they say, you know, when we come, you know, traveling in the Palm Beach airport and we pass for the exhibit, I remember one man say, I really don't see the art. I look for the price, and I choose the expensive one, because I am not buying the cheaper one now. I buy the expensive one. So in that moment, the exhibit was not on yet, and the exhibit is starting 2 weeks ago, when they sent me all the picture and everything, and I was able to see all the artists. My art piece is the expensive one. It's the most expensive one. And I did that not because thinking, oh, Palm Beach, but I remember what that man say in the country club. And I just valued my art piece as I thought, okay, you know what, this gonna be in Palm Beach International Airport. I don't want to try to be so high, but I think this is the value of my art. And right now, it's not so expensive, but is the most expensive art piece in the gallery has been exhibited. So we need to also listen what people say, and the place where our art has been exhibited.
I agree. I would say to this, because I am a champion of accessibility, right? And like to integrate that into everything I do as an artist, as a designer. And there are creative ways that we can provide accessibility while also pleasing different stakeholders, right? And so, like, for instance, like as a hip hop artist, you come to my merch table, there's going to be something for everybody there, because I have fans that are only going to pay $3 for a sticker, but I got fans that are going to pay $60 for a hoodie. So I've got both. Exactly. I'm not pricing myself out of anybody in any range. If you really want to throw your big bucks at me, you can. And if you don't have it, right? Same thing with the show, right? I will have people sponsor tickets. And so I have sponsored tickets so that people can come to my show, even if they can't afford the price point of the ticket to get in the door, right? And so I think, when it comes to theater, these are things you can think about. You can have tiered seating, and you can flip what that looks like, because I know a lot of times in our society, right? Like if you have VIP seating, it means that you paid more and you're in the front and this and that, but you can flip that for your community, right? So the community seats are VIP. They do get to sit in the front, and people may have paid more, but they might not be sitting in the front with the community because you want to make a statement about this being accessible for your community, while also saying, listen, this is a premium Black box show, and this is serious art, right? And so I think there are creative ways that you can please all of your stakeholders without, putting the price point so low that you're only reaching a certain demographic.
Mhm. And I think one of the things about this, and I love this conversation, is that if you go back to that initial profile, that worth, in the document that was sent out, or that you'll get, there's a thing about figuring out how much you need to make per day, but that worth can be a show price. But like, if you look at all those three things in tandem, what your work is, who you are as an artist, and what the worth and what the value of it is, if you think about those in tandem, then that can kind of help you navigate situations like this. Because in addition to everything else that everyone else is saying, Tariq, the other thing that comes to mind is about being able to do exactly, to be able to articulate the intention why you did what you did. Because the critic is right that it's worth more, but what you can make sure that person leaves with is the reason why you didn't charge everyone the price that it's worth. Because what that does is that ties that opportunity to who you are as an artist, and how, in the way you see your work, in a way that you don't have to worry about so much what the impression they leave with. They leave with a language that's from you about why you made that decision that you made. So it's on brand and in alignment, but also it's clear you understand, like, I know what you're saying, and I admit it. I'm not, because the thing you don't want anybody to believe is that you're unaware, because that then reflects negatively in people's perception of you as an artist when they think you don't know. But when you know, and you're able to be like, oh, I know, but the reason why I did this is this, then it's like, that then changes the perception of you as an artist, because it's like, you could have charged the people $50, but you made an intention, and you don't have to, you know, and most folks will see what's in between that. One of the things, particularly around theater, that was interesting to me that I had a conversation with in this market where I am, was that doing exactly what you're doing, Tariq, made it, you know, there were performances that there was a particular body of people who came out, and there was a really, you know, really well-known university faculty member and a real, you know, prominent director who said, everybody else is trying to figure out how to get those folks in the door. And they keep getting flagged for diversity in their audiences. But the one thing that you're able to do that they're not, and it's not about price, right? It's not about price. It's about the thought. The fact that you thought about your folks enough to price it that way means that they're going to show up for you whenever you do a show. And other folks who do theater in your city will never be able to get that demographic of folks to come out because them folks don't think about them that way. They've never done anything to build trust with the community in that way to get out the folks you get. And your folks will also bring other folks. So you'll have Black and brown folks in your spot that other folks won't have. But being able to articulate what you did with intentionality to do that is important, to make that known to the world, because that puts you in a position in terms of a thought leader as an artist about why you're doing things. It's the same thing like Emilio says about listening to folks. You've also listened to your people and created an accessible point for them into the art. There may be other folks who love you and want your work, and you're like, okay, cool, y'all love it, cool, $75. You listen to the people. Y'all said y'all wanted it. Go for y'all, 75. Y'all come on here and get this. And there's nothing wrong with all. It's still all aligned because you listen to the people. I think this is a rich conversation, man. I appreciate y'all. And this communication and P, these 5 things are just the kind of things you want to flush through with anyone in any situation. You know what the expectations are. What kind of questions need to be asked, what's the duration of the work, and then of course just keeping in mind what the value and what the investment is, because that needs to be a factor in the price, and intentional around what that means. The other thing is being okay with negotiation. Now, you know, we all artists, we're all different people. I live a very public life, but I am a very private, introverted person with social anxiety as somebody who's a performing artist. I really don't always like people, but what had to happen is that you can't escape negotiation, both in terms of negotiating a price, negotiating an opportunity, negotiating the work, especially when it's commissioned or you're in collaboration. You can't escape it. And so part of dispelling that kind of anxiety around it, you know, where there are other folks who don't have no problems, you know what I'm saying? Be like, I need this, I want this, and this is what it is. I'm not that person, but I do it. And I think in between the folks who are comfortable with it and the folks who are not is an understanding that we negotiate so much in our lives day in to day out. The anxiety is really around the perception we have of what negotiating means. It doesn't mean we can't do it or aren't good at it. We actually negotiate a lot of things. It's just that the way that we are socialized to think about negotiation is very narrow. And when we can think about the fact that we are constantly have been building our negotiation skills the entirety of our artistic careers, and for us to be where we are successful and still creating art when so many people are not even still creating art, means that we have built a capacity for negotiation. It's just, but now what does that mean when you're involving another party and you want to come to a mutually agreeable place? Does anybody want to talk a little bit about negotiation and their experiences, things they learned, tips that they have for being able to really close, being able to kind of difficult navigations, tense moments? I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear from y'all. Oh, y'all just all go get to the bag. Okay, come on now, come on.
I just feel like I'm talking a lot, so that's why I was holding off. I was like, Lauren, you're
But
talking a
like a
lot.
handful of us.
Okay.
Talk all you want.
Okay, that's true. There's 6 of us. So I'll talk. I mean, I haven't had a lot of experience. I will say I'm very much looking forward to more experience negotiating and coming to the table strong. I did have someone who I had a woman, I was applying, this was a few years ago, applied for a program actually, and I was looking for a scholarship. They said they had no scholarships. And I sat down with a woman who was the head of, you remember those scooters people drive around the Bird scooters? She's the CEO of Bird. And at that time I was going to learn how to code. Anyway, she told me, I'm tired of you not seeing that you shouldn't be paying for any program. They should be paying for you. And I was like, well, they don't have any money. She goes, no. Here's the problem. You need to walk into every room like a mediocre white man. She's a white woman. She says this to me. And I go, what do you mean? She goes, I want you to walk in the room. And when you walk in the room, I need you to think to yourself, give me my fucking money. Sorry for my obscene language, but it really changed the way that I thought about things, and understanding that, like you said, like there's a lot of work that we've done on the back end that we've done for free, and the labor that we've done for free, that it's made me realize that my time, even to learn something, I should be paid for. I should be met where I am, because there's a certain amount of value that I bring to the table, and understanding that. I will say I have watched people negotiate contracts for turn a contract that was $30,000 an episode into doubling it to $60,000 an episode because they have, an attorney. So I also think, part of negotiation is, who do you have at your table? Who's sitting at your table with you? So that's what I have to offer.
Very good point. I'm glad you mentioned that, because our growth and our trajectory also involves who can we build in our circles. And it's a thing that we as artists have to think about. I sat and watched, in this day, as everyone chases wealth in new ways and everybody's selling you a path to wealth, I sat and watched these folks, and there was 2 folks. It was the most elitist conversation I've ever watched happen. But essentially what they were basically saying were, in order to rock with us, you have to think a particular way, which was fascinating, which is why I was watching this in the first place. But what they also said is that they started bragging about their team, and their team was very specific in who they had on their team and why they had them and what skills they brought to the table in order to be able to build a team. Now, they also were like, if you are trying to learn, are trying to get where we are, we don't want you on our team. It's like, damn, that's messed up. But they would say, like, I have friends that are like, yo, I want to, figure out how to do the things that you're doing. And they were like, well, go over there and figure it out. You can't be on my team. I don't have anything but winners on my team. And I'm like, damn, that's really messed up. But they were like that. They were like, look, if you are poor middle class, you can't be on my team. I need you, and they were essentially saying you need to be rich to be on my team. Now, I mean, I haven't always been rich, but I made myself rich, so I want people who are rich on my team. The reason why I'm bringing this up is only because when they talked about the team was very specific to the situations that they knew they needed assistance dealing with. So that was the smart thing that I took away from it. It wasn't like they built the team as a counterbalance to them, like wherever they fell short or where are the things that they didn't know, that's how they added someone to the team. They didn't do that. They added someone to their team, specifically to increase their capacity to do the work. And I think that's the thing that we don't think about. We might add someone to the team as a source of need, an accountant, a lawyer, but there are other folks we have in our network, or that we want to have in our network or in our Rolodex, that are about increasing our capacity to do the work, because they do something we could do ourselves. But if we don't have to do it, then what does that do for us and the work that we're creating when we have someone that can do that for us? And I was like, that was the one thing I took away. The rest of it, I would never, ever have anybody ever watch these two dudes pawn over themselves about their ability to have accumulated wealth. But I thought that was very interesting, because there are folks that we will need. And part of this conversation around contracts and statement of work is being able to think about who. And they, we don't have to have a staff to have folks to do work. It's another thing. Like, we don't have to have a staff. Like, folks don't have to be on staff, but we can have folks that we can have at our disposal in order to be able to execute some of the things that we need done. And so I'm glad you brought that point up. Any other negotiation experiences, tips, best practices? Anybody else have any anecdotes for us?
What I like to say is, we artists usually, and many artists say, I produce art, I create art, I don't know nothing about how to negotiate, I don't care, I don't know how to do it. The only know to do is do art. And in some point I agree, because there are people that they are not able to do this kind of, to do business, to be a business person. It's an art also, right? So one tip or something that I have learned through my different careers. I am an artist since I remember. In my elementary and my high school, art always was art. But my parents say, you can not be an artist because artists don't pay bills. You need to do something else. Become a lawyer, become an engineer, whatever. Don't forget you're passionate about art. Continue doing until the point that you can pay your bills with your art. But before that, do something else, a career. So I grew up thinking like that. So I finished my high school in art. I get a scholarship to go to a university to work in the theater company, doing production and doing custom design and also acting. And one part of the scholarship or benefit of the scholarship is I can choose whatever in the university, and I choose to be an engineer. But in order to get that benefit, you have to continue doing your art, what you was a scholar for, be one of the best, because if you are not one of the best, you lost the scholarship in order to get the other for free. So I was able to manage the whole thing. In that process, in that career, I learned how to apply to projects. So now I still with another career, and I still in doing art. Always when I am approaching or I am trying to get money to finance my art, I apply what I learned in the planning process as an engineer, and the how to apply to a project. And we as an artist, we need to understand the language of the people who have the money. And we need to answer them the way they're asking. We artists, we like to say, oh, use the imagination and put beautiful words and poetry. And we are not given the answer and the language that they're asking for. So we need to do that. Yes, we are an artist. Our creative process is different, but in the moment of negotiate something, give them what they're asking for.
Yep. And until there are more artists, and there's a movement, but it's slow, until there are more artists that are a part of this financing business world, what Emilio is saying is very true. Because the language being used won't broaden until there's more folks who are a part of the community that is making the decisions about where money goes. And unfortunately, what ends up happening, and I've had this showing up to have conversations as part of the startup culture, there is a perception that has been going on for too long about artists that shapes the expectation in the way that they talk to us when we come around when it comes to business. And there's a bias, whether it's explicit or implicit, that shapes the way they talk with us. So if we aren't using the language, then it feeds the bias, and it becomes a barrier to us being able to get the support that we need, because it feeds the perception that we're not business savvy. And all it takes is to use the same language and their whole perception shifts, but that's because it gets past the bias. And I've literally had folks on panels in front of folks, with the slick, well, artists need to know more about business. And it's like, well, how about, really? Or should y'all actually consider that, or should y'all make room for considering our industry in a way that shouldn't business be more like the language broadened to consider our industry as a vertical, that y'all need to be able to talk to us? No, they're not. No, that's how it should be, but that's not where they are. Their perception is we don't know business. And so I think that's an important thing to consider, because that bias is there. And when we talk about sponsorships, when we talk about funders, not grants, because usually grant folks love the arts and that's why they're working and trying to make sure grants are available. But private donor funding and backing and angel investing in our projects, there are folks out there who believe we don't know business, and being able to make sure that we can goes back to that, being able to articulate what we're doing in a way that makes sense is important until we can shift that narrative.
I have a question for you or whoever can answer this. So that was such a really, really great question. And I find myself in a unique position. For the last year and a half, I've been working on my documentary, but obviously, you can only get so far with little money. So you get to a place where, obviously it's raising funds. And I spent the last 14 years in Los Angeles, which is like a very specific process. So last year I was doing a lot of going back and forth to LA because I haven't been living there for the last year and a half, and, taking meetings. And I have friends who are heads of studios and, but still, right? Okay, well, Lauren, we don't know you as a producer, right? This is your first feature-length documentary, and you don't have anybody attached to this. And so, okay, well, I want to get somebody attached to it. And then I get like a consulting producer that has a name, and it still doesn't get you through like all the doors. So there's that hustle. And then I said, well, you know what? I'm here in Texas right now, and I do have a lot of connections to very untraditional resources. So those untraditional resources are people who own like 30 plus McDonald's, and they're multimillionaires, and they give millions away a year in funding, or they invest in projects or things. So I took a couple of meetings, very what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, they over the phone, very informal, but I realized I wasn't prepared. So as I began to talk to them about my project, I spoke as if I was talking to someone who in the industry understands the lingo, understands how I would pitch this project. And immediately they're like, oh my gosh, a documentary following 3 men of color on their journey post-incarceration and as they journey through education and using education for their redemption. Okay, and liberation. I get that. Yes, this is great. We got to tell this story. But for people who are not in the industry, they're like, so my business coach said to me, they don't understand what's in it for them. if they give you money, they don't get what's in it for them. And anyone who's in entertainment knows you can invest in a documentary and we can have a $250,000 budget and we might not make any of that back unless we do very well in the festivals and Netflix decides to buy it, or, you know, or Apple decides to buy it. So I don't really, but these resources are still there. There's a lot of these resources that I'm sitting on, and I need to know how to best prepare. And if this isn't the time to talk about it, we can talk about it later, but I need to know. And thank you, Emilio, for saying that, because it was a very clear moment for me of like, I don't really understand the proper business lingo for them to understand why this investment would serve them.
Yes, great point. And and that and the fact that you thought about those other sources of funding is a place that as artists that we can find ourselves in a lot, because those different sources are often closer to us. We've known folks we've known folks who have gone on to navigate their careers in whatever field. And so we're 1 to 2 degrees of separation from a person, or have done a project where there were folks there. Your name often gets farther than you do because you never know what conversations you're in when you're not there. And so there are folks who are familiar with your work and have heard your name, but never seen your face. So, but they also have no clue what you're doing. And your description and passion for describing the work sounds like an artist. And they're waiting for the close. They're waiting for, what am I going to get and what do you need? And if we don't close because we want them to be impassioned and like, then once again, we don't know business, because a person coming in to sell is going to close. And so, and they're going to have the language to get to the point of, and so you're right. I feel like one of the things about that is that we also have to understand that we shouldn't be expected to have that language, because that language is very specific to the industry. And unless we also, as an artist, are also coming from an industry where we're at a point of using that language, but it is also an opportunity to figure out who does, and who can we sit with in collaboration and walk through our pitches and walk through with, to be able to make that translation. This is not something we need to do in isolation, and we don't have to, and we can do it within our networks. A lot of the things that I've learned and I've been able to implement came from having folks who stepped away from their jobs and stepped out into independent contracting and stepped out as entrepreneurs, and then started telling all the secrets, like all the tips, from stepping out from fundraising, stepping out from marketing, stepping out from these companies. And we're like, look, this is what's really going on. And they'll sit, but otherwise, and I happen to be one of them folks who have an arts degree and a business degree. But like that language gets even more, it changes over time, and it's very specific depending on what group of folks you're talking to, and it can be industry vertical specific. I only started using the term industry vertical in the last year. Okay, I ain't know nothing about an industry vertical until I started working with folks who were around VC. And they just kept saying industry vertical. And I was like, what the hell is an industry vertical? And then I realized it's the type of business. Oh, okay. All right, got it. I understand what an industry vertical is. But like, what I'm saying? These are, but there are ways of equipping ourselves. And I love that. I feel like that that question that you raised, Lauren, is one that we all like. It's one that we need to all keep talking about. And I would like for, and keep digging through, because it's very important. But my immediate piece of advice is to think about your network and who's got time to sit and really brainstorm with you in order of being able to put that together. Because and here's the reason why. There is a way of being able to articulate that you may not make the money back, but there is value to you as a business or as a company or as a investor. That is not about that particular return on investment. There are other ROIs that are beneficial. And if you can articulate those, you'll find that some of those other things are aligned with the person, but they haven't been presented with the opportunity to explore them. But it is about figuring out what those other ROIs are. And if one person's eyes get big, then you know you got something, because somebody else's eyes will get big. There's a lot of social engagement, social responsibility, social entrepreneurship. There's these aspects of social entrepreneurship that folks are looking to be involved with. It's sort of kind of the kind of like continuum of what philanthropy was for a lot of times. You know, for some people, it's just, I want to feel good money. For other people, it's my way of giving back as I continue to be a capitalist. But they need someone to articulate that, because so here's the other thing about it. Well, not the other thing. Here's one thing about it is that so much is about articulation, because and for artists, there are things that we're able to see that we sometimes, because we're artists, think is unusual or weird, but not valuable. But what we see is something that other people don't see the way that we see it, which is why we're able to create what we're able to create. When we find the language, what we find is that translation then leads to what is oftentimes a gap or undiscovered business opportunity when we translate it to the business world. So that person, regardless of how wealthy they are, when we can articulate what we see as creatives and translate it to what is tangible for them as business folks, what we've articulated is oftentimes something they've wondered about or thought about but hadn't seen, and can then put us in a position for a relationship that can be really fruitful because of what we are now able to put them in position to be able to execute on. That was a conversation I had this summer. I was in Dallas, Texas, talking to a group of folks from a variety of different backgrounds. And that was sort of one thing that was kind of really illuminating that we got to talking about, is what happens when we're able to make that translation. Because oftentimes what comes out of it isn't something that people are thinking about. This is Rihanna. Work. That's how I decided to introduce statement of work. There's some really, I think if you haven't gotten introduced to the statement of work, you will soon. If you have, you understand. And it really is just a detailed way to outline what is going into the project as much detail as possible. This is very beneficial for both sides, but extremely beneficial for us because it helps set those expectations that's been discussed down on paper. Some people do this, and this is the contract. Sometimes this is what helps map out everything so that folks can go back to get the contract done. It depends on the scope and scale of the entity. For some small, for some, some organizations with less hierarchy, this is enough and it's legally binding and they're good to go. For some folks, the person who outlines the statement of work isn't the person who authorizes the contract, and so that process is a part of a continuum, especially if you're dealing with large institutions and universities, and we won't even talk about city and state or federal government. God, the number of people you have to talk to is ridiculous. But what's listed here are the kinds of things that are kind of outlined and discussed and gone over and detailed. Is the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and the how. Who's providing the services, what services are being provided, the scope of work and the deliverables, any kind of assumptions or who's responsible for what, barriers to work, any failures, delays, inaccuracies. When will they start? When will it be completed? If there are benchmarks, if that's tied to payment. One of the key things is if there's an agreement on the amount of time invested, and then what happens if more time is needed. Where will the services take place? What is the reason for the services being performed? And then of course the most important part is how is it all going to be paid? So how the service is going to be delivered and then how you're going to get paid. And is it fixed? Is it a fixed rate? Is it something that is going to be done differently? Deposit upfront, however it's going to get paid, especially for commissioned work. If you're being commissioned to do work over time, considering the fact that you have to survive over time is very important. And thinking about how this gets laid out, don't put yourself in a situation where you're having to work and kind of hold yourself together until that check comes. That weight is can be traumatizing at times, Lord Jesus. It's one of the things, but it just is important. But as any, there's some, there are a variety of different ways to approach this conversation around it. But as long as, it's all towards being able to settle in on what the expected outcome is, you're in a good place. What have been people's experiences with having to, settle on and map out a statement of work? Anyone want to share? Is that Emilio?
Yeah. Well, that was a very, very difficult, what I can say, task for me when I was dealing with the city of West Palm Beach government. And this part and the slide that you are sharing with us, the who. I remember when I was doing this, it was something, not because I knew, it's something that, and now you say, it's that the who is not just who is the artist. Also, I was thinking, the person who is asking me this is the manager of public art of the city of West Palm Beach, but she is not the one who wanna decide. Who is going to decide? So I start doing my research. And I find out that we're gonna be a committee. The city committee, they put another committee in charge to do that. Oh, Jesus. So I start looking who the people are. So I did my research. I Google everyone and who they are, what they're looking for. And when I was doing my statement of work, I write down in some language that I knew they will say, oh, these artists are going to give to the city of West Palm Beach something that I like to have. So that part is for me, was very important. And I remember there were more than 500 artists in Palm Beach County who applied for that. And I was one of the 10 that they select. In that particular one, after talking with them, and I remember in the cocktail party for the press with the artists they introduced, one of them approached me and said, you know what, the way you explained, I feel you were talking to me. And I didn't say to him, but I say myself, that was my intention. Talk to you. So that part, always when I see, when I apply for a call or for a project or for it, I always do my research. We as an artist, we need to do that. To find out who are we to please. right? For example, Lauren, if you had people in Texas, and that is what I think now. I say, oh my God, Lauren had a great opportunity. If she had people who have money or can invest in McDonald's. So try to find out what benefits your art, your documentary can give it to them. Maybe, I don't know, maybe make sure the McDonald's business that they have will be getting more clients, more customers through your art. So that is the way I see things. How people and how those who have the money will get some benefit from my art.
Thank you, Amelia. Other thoughts, other experiences?
I guess for me, what has helped me like is creating like a statement of work, a general body, and being able to pivot and edit and like use that one statement of work for a specific project. And depending on what am I applying or who am I, like if I'm doing a pitch deck, right, that would be totally different than an application to, you know, Compass, right? But it could be the same exact artistic vision or project that I want to do, the same statement of work, right? But how I present it, like, of course, Compass is, you know, it's public health, right? So it's going to be some kind of, you know, benefits to, you know, we talk about HIV at this, you know, when we talk about Compass, so it needs to be geared to, you know, something in that, you know. But if I'm doing a pitch deck to, I don't know, Austin's Women's Network, who has, you know, money that they want to support, you know, artistic project, it would be totally different. And I realized when I first was kind of doing that a couple of years ago, I felt like I was writing this stuff all the time. Like it became so like looking for funding became an artistic project itself. And so I feel like what I really got the grasp of is saving like before I submit like applications or stuff like that, I save them. And so I can like go back, and because it's way more fun when you have like something you already have and you can get creative with representing it to something else or representing it in a different format. Like I enjoy that than having to think about writing or applying for like a 30-page grant or funding and doing 5 interviews, right? Like I try to just I try to stay within the statement of work and use that to pivot more so than creating a new statement of work for everything that I apply for. And I was doing that at first. So I learned the hard way after being burned looking for money.
No, that's very important. And, you know, a puzzle, I always like to say a puzzle is way more fun than a blank canvas. And when you can build the pieces, then you just have to put them together. But starting with that blank canvas each time, my goodness. And submitting a thing and realizing when you realize that it is going to send you a confirmation, but it is not going to send you a copy of what you submitted, my goodness, the pain you feel in that moment. Because you typed it out, you had it, you had it, and then you just deleting and closing things like, I got it submitted. Oh my goodness. Or that moment where you get contacted and they are talking about something you don't remember you typed because they reading it and you ain't. It's also a very real thing that happens. But yes, no. Our experiences should be building our own archive and library of tools at our disposal to use, because as we continue on, it is an art form into itself. It is part of the work. We create, we meet folks, we answer the calls for us to be involved in things, and we seek resources and funding. And, you know, residencies, fellowships, you know, we look for these things. Pitch decks is another important part. And so being able to have these things set And then when we get solicited for a project, they want the bio, they want the information, and they want the artist's own words about what the work is. And so, you know, these are the kinds of things that we do not want to have to keep creating, but we want to have so that we can, especially when it works, when we've been successful in acquiring funding and acquiring opportunities. The way that we articulated in that moment when we captured that lightning in a bottle is something we do not want to lose. Because if it grabbed those folks' minds and hearts, then we want to, I need that. And so we don't want to recreate it. But yes, this statement of work is important. It's also important to have and be familiar with. Also, there's you got RFIs, requests for information, you got RFPs, requests for proposals, you've got letters of intent, you've got master, there's all these kinds of things that as artists, depending on what funding and what situation and what entity that we may be asked to be able to have to, work with. But a big portion of it is the same information. It's about us, who we are, what we're working on, and what we're trying to create. And they can make it a lot easier when we can grab that, and then we can focus on the questions that are distinct to each one of those things. When we started, none of us, I don't think any of us expected that we were going to have to fill out so many things and do so much paperwork with so much legalese. But it is a huge part. I will also say this, and I don't know what people's experiences are, but I want to take a moment to say, Compass, Wake Forest University has been amazing, but in general, universities are the worst when it comes to artists, because we are independent contractors, and the difference between vendors and contractors in the university system and how that gets treated is horrendous across the country, in terms of, because it does not value our process. It does not value us as people who need to eat and pay bills and buy supplies. So I say that to say that also being very clear, because the folks that we're talking to are well-intended, but often won't think about things unless we ask certain questions that will put us in the position to have a clear understanding of what's going to, because what happens is they won't think about it. We won't ask, the process starts, and it won't be them that's holding up the process. I think it's there are other folks who are in the way. And we're like, where's our money? Where's where are we in this process? I haven't got a signed contract, what's going on? So that is another thing. It's at the point of going through a statement of work or even getting into contracts, being very clear about the process of things, especially with major institutions. It is wild. Being on both sides of it as an artist and as an administrator working for these institutions, it is absolutely ridiculous. What artists have to go through, all contractors, but artists specifically, because the timeline for the work, it does not match the timeline of how those resources get processed. And the folks who are requesting the work and the folks who are responsible for processing the resources and are not interested in the arts at all. They do not care at all. So it's an important thing. Government contracts are the same way. They say net 90, yeah, they ain't paying you. They not. Let me tell y'all, I had an experience where someone literally, I'm signing paperwork, and the person, as I'm signing, the person's like, well, look, I just want you to know, there's a box in here, need you to put a date. And they told me, I can't remember what they told me, but they told me to make sure I put a specific date. And the reason why is they were like, because if you don't, I'm telling you, this person is going to put this at the bottom of the pile. She's telling me, like, this is what's going to happen. And everything that has everything that has these particular things outlined in this paperwork are going to go to the top because they have to do them. And then they will process everything else. And the reason will be because you did not outline these specific things, and the person that contracted you did not tell you. So I'm gonna go ahead and tell you now that if you want this to happen in this time frame, this is what you need to do, or otherwise I'm going to let you know. They're going to go through and sort all these, and everything that does not have these things spelled out are going to the bottom. But we love you as an artist, and we think you're amazing. We can't wait for you to work with us.
You know,
really, yes.
I was just gonna say, you know, I told myself I was never gonna work with another college again, because I was last year I was contracted through Rutgers University Newark to alongside the Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation Center, which is funded by the Kellogg Foundation, and alongside the AACU. So I was contracted by all three of them, but paid through Rutgers. So essentially money that they funneled into Rutgers paid me. I produced, wrote, and directed a film that was shown to thousands. And that, number one, I was underpaid. And I knew I was being underpaid the moment I agreed to do the job, but I also knew the possibility and reach of this film. And so I said, I'm gonna do it because I believe in the message. And, you know, I'm here in Jersey anyway filming. So I'm going to use my funds, and I'm already paying for this shoot, and I'm going to get the footage I need and get paid some more money and whatever. It took me 6.5 months to get paid for that. But they literally came to me with like 6 or 7 iterations. And what I learned is I didn't have it lined out before. I will do 2 edits. So at that point, it was like, it was kind of out of control. I mean, every other day I was going back to my editor, and then ended up having to come out of my pocket because I was like, it is not just for me to pay my editor only what he's asking for. I need to go above because he's done more work, you know? So I don't know how you necessarily navigate that if you're taking something really fast, but is that something also, like you were talking about, dating contracts, and with the schools, they do things a lot backwards. Like I gave my statement of work and I gave my deliverable dates, but everything on their end, even the I don't know what it was called. It wasn't a contract per se, but registering me as, you know, an independent contractor and all of that was completely backwards. And I was in email communication with like 7 different people in different parts of the institution just to track down my money.
Yep. Yes. And it's important to find out how clear the person who is your point of contact is with the process, because that makes it worse. Because you'll find out that sometimes what happens is that they didn't do a thing right, and the person on the other end does not care. But what doesn't get discussed, but also is very real, is based on what's spelled out. If you keep talking to the person that booked you, then you're going to run into an obstacle, because they're just going to call somebody and run into an obstacle. But if you call the department or area specifically, they're going to go by what's in the paperwork, because they have to. And so if you spell things out, they're just going to look, and and then what ends up happening is you're going to find out then that things can move a lot quicker than they tell you they can, but it's only because they don't want any liability. So that's why, you know, I was told, like, be very specific, because if I run into any issues, it's not the person who I negotiated with that's going to be the thing. Is if it gets escalated, then that's where the quickness is. But only if it's in black and white, because that's what's going to make the move. And I've seen that being on the other side. I've seen folks, we've signed paperwork, and they kind of was nice and waited, and we kept getting like, we're delayed. And they called and they looked, well, this contract says this. Next thing you know, a check gets cut. But they didn't tell us the check could get cut until someone looked and then consulted legal, and legal was like, cut the check. Because I don't want to be involved in this. Cut check now. And it's like, but I've been fighting, you know what I'm saying? I've been fighting through my business folks to get this check cut for a month now. It's wild. It's absolutely out of control, but it may make us feel like we don't want to be as heavy-handed with the paperwork and the things that we put in place, but with certain institutions, the more detail and the more intense we can have the conversation on the front end, the better we are on the back end, as a rule of thumb. Tariq, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, right? Like you said, like kind of like knowing your rights around like working with these institutions. Because I had a situation where I was doing like a webinar, art webinar, and I had signed a contract with this institution, and the amounts, we agreed on an amount, but eventually it was more that they wanted me to do, and then I got a contract with a more amount, and so and I signed up, like, okay, that's cool. Then maybe like a month later, I was like, I haven't, like, how it goes, like, any updates, around like payment is minimum. Oh, you sent the contract. I said, yeah, the financial people sent me the contract. I signed it, W-9, all that sent, like we did that a month ago. Oh, da-da-da. And then so they tried to send me a new contract with like a lower price, right? Like a lower payment. And I was like, well, no, I've already signed the contract at a certain amount. And then they said, well, oh, that was the amount that we have budgeted for speakers all month or something like that. I was like, well, I don't know about that. Like, I don't know exactly where, but I signed the contract with that amount, and you can't come back and bring me a contract a month later after service has been rendered with a lower amount. And I was like, if there is, like, if there is someone else that I need to speak to about this, and again, so it went up the chain. And like you said, it went back to the signed contract that I was originally given. And they just said, yeah, and I got the payment like the next day, right? Like, with the original amount, because at that point it got, negligent, and nobody, none of them institutes want that kind of press or whatever. But you have to kind of be like diligent around like standing up for yourself, because like it just didn't make, it didn't make total sense to me, but I guess it could have made sense to them, that the error was supposedly made, but it was just not a fair situation, thing. So I had to kind of not fight, but like defend, the original contract, because they will try to kind of lowball you or change things up if they can get away with it, And I understand it could have been a mistake. Maybe it was. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I didn't sign that, so so that was just an example.
I want to say the Wake Forest University has been wonderful. There have been no issues or problems. I've done a couple of different projects, especially with Compass, and no issues whatsoever. So I just want to say that. And then also this,
I was gonna say that's fascinating. As someone who's worked at Wake Forest for years, and I've been in positions where I've been responsible for coordinating and booking and getting people paid. And I will say that also the barriers within the institution as a Black person trying to figure out how to get people paid when they want to be paid, right? Like people would tell me, oh, it can't be done. And I'm employed at the university, right? And they're like, oh, it can't be done that way, or we can't do this, or we can't do that. And then, like y'all have said, you find out, oh, yes, you can. Mm-hmm. Oh, and I needed to be talking to this person, and this was a workaround that I could have been doing, and this and that. And so, my first year working at Wake Forest, I just thought, okay, look, this is the process. This is how it goes. After a few years, it was like, yeah, we could get you paid when you want to be paid, like, because I know how to do it now. But they tried to stop me from learning those things as well. So it's a lot to it with the universities, and they are really backward, I think.
Yeah. I was gonna say, my experience is exactly, what you talked about, Dasan. I had the thing, I was contracted. This is with a university and with a city as well. Like it was, you come in, you do this, you sign up as a vendor on their network or whatnot, or in their database, and then you render your services, and then you expect to get paid. But it's just like, you know, you have this middleman, this person that was able to like send you the contract, or, you know, basically referred you or whatnot. And then it's just like, so they're talking on your behalf. And then finally it's, so who do I need to talk to? Because clearly, like, they're not, you know, they're not telling you what they need, you know, what they need to tell you or whatnot. And they're giving you the runaround. So I need to go to the next person. So I'm going to take out the middleman. Like you said, as soon as I did that, it was, okay, boom, like within, I think, couple of days, the money was direct deposited into my account. I didn't have to wait for a paper check or anything. It was like, boom, we got it. So why were you giving the person who referred me such a hassle? You know, kind of like what Demi is saying. And the same thing with, you know, with the city of Durham. Like, I contracted to do something with them, and it was the same thing. And it was like, so who else do I need to talk to? You know, and I think it's trial and error. Like, you learn after a while, like, okay, like you're the person who referred me, and I thank you, but I'm gonna have to go to somebody else because they're just gonna give you the runaround, right? I think the other thing, to what Lauren was saying, was some of those things, if you have the time, I know you said that the process happens pretty quickly, like you can put those things within your contract, like this contract covers 2 like revisions, you know, or whatnot. But after that, like any additional revisions are going to cost you, or we need to do like a change order within the contract, which is going to be an additional amount of money, right? Because we're changing the contract now. But if you have that stuff lined up, again, if you have the time and you know how to do it, like you put that stuff in the contract, like what, there are only going to be 2 revisions. Like if there's 5 or 6, it's going to cost you each time to do those revisions, right? So I think that's something as well to just keep in mind.
And I think it goes back to what Tariq was saying, is that when we can think through these things and have these conversations and then start to kind of map out so that we're pulling from this, and we can kind of think about some of these scenarios and some of our experiences and start to kind of, you know, the administrative side of being an artist is to sit and start to like go through these documents that we're going to keep touching and start to put these provisions and things there, and we can grab them or eliminate them. But it's much easier to take them out, but to have thought through them and have the language and have had a chance to sit with them and make sure we got the right language in there for these scenarios than to not. And then other pieces, I think, goes back to what Amelia was saying, is not only when we're seeking funding, but also in terms of understanding the process of funding, is it goes back to people. A lot of this is about people. And relationships, and sometimes it's the relationships within an institution. You know, even review panels and things like that. Like, you know, there's some reviews for funding where the first group of folks reviews it, but that's not the decision-making body. But when you talk and you ask questions, they never tell you about the total process. They'll tell you it goes to review, they're just, you know, you'll get scored, whatever. They never tell you that all of that then goes to the funding body. And there's a group of people who look at it's a recommendation. That's not where it ends. And so our point of contact often, especially in the arts, is a part of a process with these funds. And the way that our contracts and negotiations go, sometimes it's good to think about, to remember that, and to ask, like, I appreciate you, thank you so much, but like, can you like outline this process for me? So much so that the performing arts organization I work with now is the university put them in such a bad place that they're now thinking about putting together one sheets that kind of map out the process to offer the artists, because they don't want to be caught in the middle anymore, because it starts to ruin their artistic relationships. So sometimes, and that can happen with the city too. Like the commissions and the organizations are put in a position where they don't want to continue to fracture relationships with artists because of the bureaucracy. And we can get caught in the middle of that. And so sometimes we want to, you know, it's important to kind of, you know, do some research and our ability to be able to negotiate around that not only helps us get our money, but it also makes it easier for us to get funding for future work, because we are the folks who have been able, like, you know, your name comes up, they're like, oh, well, such and such called over here last time. You know what? Let's make sure. Let's make sure.
I can speak to that real quickly.
Yeah,
Just
go ahead, Max.
my bad. I feel like
No,
I'm
keep no,
talking
this
a
is
lot,
beautiful. Go ahead.
but just being so I was on a board that actually did that, right? Like we recommended funds specifically for festivals. So it was city funding that was used for festivals. When I came in, I was the only Black male on that board, right? In 2019. And what was interesting was because of some of the relationships I had within the city with artists and activists and stuff, when I got on the board and kind of saw how it worked, I was able to go to some of them and say, hey, I know what you're doing in the community, and I know you are like bootstrapping everything. There's funds for you, and I want you to apply to this. And if you need some help in that application process, like let me know, you know, or I can send you some resources or something like that, right? But I think your name needs to be in this pot, and what you're doing needs to be funded with some kind of funds from the city. So they should be supporting it. So that was like, because of relationships that I already had with those people, and I had the privilege to sit on this board, I was able to reach out to them and was excited because one of them actually did apply out of the 3 people that I talked to and got over like $11,000 in funding, right? So I thought that was like amazing for her festival. But it's just like, that's also important. Like I don't control the funds, but I do sit in a space where, you know what I'm saying, like I may have some say in how those funds are divvied up. And then we recommend that to the city or whatnot. So I think in what you were saying is building those relationships sometimes is very, very important, you know, and those are just people that may be on the same, those are your peers. They may not be people sitting high up, but they do have some influence in certain spaces, you know? And so I think that's another thing.
And those folks have relationships with each other. And what can help contract negotiations is knowing that you know people that they know. Relationships is how business is done. There are lots of other ways to do business, but relationships are still premium and highly valued because that is the way you can be sure, you know, that is where the trust is about the business dealings that you're doing. And being the relationships that you have and the connections that you make are very helpful in making it easier when you're negotiating what gets processed, what gets taken care of first. It's just how it is. I mean, it's sometimes you know, it's you're like, wow. And you know, you hate when you're the beneficiary and somebody else isn't, but that's the way it is. Like the relationships and quality of work, the level of professionalism, consistency in work, all these things have an impact. And when you are solid across the board, then that matters. And so that is also a part of this process, is the way that you show up in the relationships that get built, because it will make things a lot easier. So the last kind of couple of things here, it's just talking about contracts, and we all understand what contracts are, but also this, you know, just 4 quick tips. The first tip is, of course, understanding the terms of any contract you're presented with. Having a lawyer around or some legal assistance is important. To make sure to consider the contract as a whole, you know, to really dive in and think about what everything that's being outlined in the contract really means. Know exactly what you need, because you want to make sure that's included in the contract. And of course, always read the fine print. You never want to get caught by overlooking the fine print of any contract, especially when the contract is being presented to you and is not originated by you. And that's one of those other dynamics. We always need to have our own contracts and invest in getting our own contracts put together on our side, or having the resources to be able to do so. But especially when we're being presented with a contract, dig through that thing with a fine-tooth comb. It may look familiar, many of them look the same, but that's not what you're worried about. The parts that look the same are not the parts you're worried about. It's the parts that are different that will come back to bite you. And that net, I didn't always understand what net meant as an artist, but I tell you what, I also realized that on the administrative side, not everybody on the administrative side understands what net means when it's in a contract either. So everybody's not having the same conversation. They're repeating this language. It gets put together by legal. It gets, where this language is getting put together. But not everybody who's operating with these contracts understands all these parameters until something doesn't go right. And then you realize you didn't know, I didn't know, you didn't know. So our ability to understand these contracts and what's happening in them is really key. I think ultimately, as we wrap on up, it's just, one of the things is about being able to have these conversations. I'm glad, I appreciate y'all sharing, is that when we can talk about these things as artists collectively, we can kind of learn from each other, but also we can kind of also realize that, when I know that these things are not isolated, it helps me prepare better. When these experiences are not isolated, when they're common, when other folks are having them, then it means, okay, let me not just deal with this in the moment, but let me start to put in place and start to think through how I would want to maneuver through this situation, because it's likely it might happen again. And my ability to be prepared is going to help me be able to get what I need out of the situation. So I think this is an important kind of conversation to continue to have. And there's some things we talked about today that we need to continue to talk about, especially when we're thinking about funding sources and how we are making sure that, and it's how we're articulating our work, how we're articulating our value, what we value. Businesses aren't the only ones who need value propositions. They're value propositions for us as artists in the way that we work and what matters to us. And these kinds of things are the kinds of things that translate across the board. If our artistic statement and our artistic declaration are about our work, the way we work, is not that different. When we talk about alignment with that, we're talking about alignment in a way that organizations and businesses and funders are talking about being mission and vision aligned. When we're talking about the things that matter to us, we're talking about value propositions, and we're talking about the way we offer and provide value to folks. Like, we're talking about value propositions. We're talking about, there's ways of working that are entrepreneurial in spirit and can be contextualized in ways that are familiar to other folks, so that they understand exactly what it means to do business with us. They love our art and they love who we are as artists, but there is another thing that we should be, articulating and defining for ourselves about what it means to do business with us. And that's an ongoing conversation. So I appreciate y'all, man. I appreciate y'all in this conversation and this session today. Any final thoughts, comments, encouragements, and pieces of advice?
Yeah, I just want to say this conversation was really great, and I hope we can have more opportunities in the lit cohort to gather like this. I do find that there's a lack of space where artists gather. I don't know if did I pause? I don't know if my internet's being funny, but there's a lack of space where artists are gathering, I feel like, with a level of transparency. So when we're talking about negotiating and even understanding, like coming in at a certain level and maybe what our peers were paid before or how they got to where they are, it's kind of like those guys you gave an example of, Dasan, that are like, well, I don't work with anybody who's not on my level. And we sometimes play that game with one another. And I don't know if that's kind of that fear mentality that there's not enough, or maybe it's scarcity, that there's not enough. But I think there needs to be more conversations in community that really is more about that ladder of pulling each other up and creating more space at the table. So I really appreciated this. So thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm with you. Other thoughts?
Absolutely, yeah. I agree with you, Lauren. So we need, to look for more spaces or places like this that we have right now to talk, seriously, or to talk, informal, whatever we do, but we need to talk. We need to express our concerns and find better ways, because there are many ways, but not every way is the best for me, or maybe the one is good for me is not good for anyone, for everyone. So we need to find different ways to address the different challenge that we have as an artist. And I was one of start talking about we need to speak the language or understand the language the other. That is why I am in this cohort, because I don't really know how to speak to church people. Church, I grew up as a religious Catholic in my family, and I had aunts who are very, very religious, and I had priests in the Catholic church, but I don't how I can say, I believe in God, yes, but I don't belong to any of the different religions and churches that are out there. So I don't know the language. I grow up with the language, but I don't know really the language. So we need to find spaces and places where we can go safely. That is why I want to say thank you for everyone, because I feel safe talking with you and be in this particular project, working with Wake Forest University, with Marcus, with Demi, I feel safe. So we need to find or to create those spaces, those places for people, for artists, to find these moments like this, to learn from each other.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thoughts, comments, encouragement?
For me, it was a great conversation, and I definitely think we can keep the conversation going. It's a lot more I would love to hear and learn about negotiating, because it's ever going, so and evolving. So yes, great conversation.
And
Yeah.
Tariq, you really, this is the thing. Dasan said something earlier saying, you know, when you know your audience, like that's a special thing, and no one else, like you're filling a gap, right? And that's also like an entrepreneurial gap you're filling. But I think I said it in the chat, but Tyler Perry did that well, and he did it well in such a way that a lot of people laughed at him and were kind of like that critic, like, why are you doing that? Like, what? And he knew that there was a need. And guess what? People show up, whether you like his work, whether you don't like his work, they show up, and his pockets ain't hurting, and he's just fine. Okay. And his audience is fed. So go with your gut.
Yep. I agree. You know, lead with that articulation. Make sure people know why you're making the moves that you make, especially as artists of color, because oftentimes benevolence is a thing. People will think they helping, and they are well intended in how they help, but they don't understand the bias and the way and that is influencing why they are helping the way they're helping. And there is a perception that we don't know why we're doing certain things. So what can shift that and disrupt that and tear that apart is to let them know, like, no, I know exactly why I did this, and this is why. And it shifts the dynamic. And they go, oh, well then, and then the conversation shifts. And that desire to help still there, but the bias goes away, and they can see you as the thinker that you are and not just the creator. Part of the thing that we're battling is that folks recognize our ability to create, and they love the imagination and the artistic vision, but they do not value us enough as artists, as thinkers. And so that factors into how we negotiate. It factors into what amount of money they provide. Like the conversation around resources is about, I am offering you a thing because I value this part of you, but I am not having the kind of conversations I should because I do not see you as a thinker. And when we can change that dynamic, then that shifts, because anybody else they negotiate with for any product or service, they are engaging with as a thinker, because the expectation is that's the way the conversation about the product or service is going to go. You're not think about it the same way as artists. So that's what we're affirming, and we have to lead with that. Like, no, this is the whole of who you are engaging with. Now let's have the conversation that you want to have. All right, Demi, Marcus, back to y'all.
Thank you so much, Dasan. Thank all of you. I feel like the conversation has been wonderful. Marcus has put an evaluation in the chat. If you all would take a couple of minutes to fill that out, especially because there's only 4 of you or 3 of you on this call. So it would be great if you all could fill it out for us. Our next gathering, we don't have one planned for just the cohort for the remainder of the year, but there is a training on the 15th that we would like each of you to attend on sexuality, stigma, and theology. It's November 15th. There's also a self-paced video replay in October on social media and communications that will be posted for you to progress through as well. In the meantime, as coaches, myself and Dasan have been in contact with each of you, so make sure you're taking full advantage of the opportunity to meet with your coaches. And then again, if you have any questions, please email myself or Marcus, and we'll be happy to help you out. Awesome. All right, y'all. Thank you, everyone.
You're
Thank you
welcome,
so
and thank
much.
you. Bye-bye. Great to see you. All
Great
you.
combo. You too. Have a good one, everyone.